The old bat never looked better. It's great. You're doing fine.
Thanks.
Initially, what I wanted to do with my life was become a comic book artist or an illustrator. So I was able to sort of draw up about 10 or 15 initial drawings of what I thought the Gremlins should look like.
And he drew pictures of these things that really ended up, I mean, it didn't have all of the detail and everything, but the big ears and the, so he sort of had this notion of what they should look like. And that was the jumping off point.
I had a couple of King Charles Cavalier Spaniels, and the only thing I asked Joe Dante to do was, can you make the fur look like my King Charles dogs? So when you really look at a Gizmo, he has the actual Blenheim fur of a King Charles Cavalier Spaniel.
We had these Mogwai designs. I remember a big tubby one that looked sort of like Peter Ustinov, and they weren't quite coming together, but we finally found one that we did like, and we had to figure out how we were going to make this believable.
So we employed Chris Wayless, who had worked with us before, and we knew he was completely immersed in the animatronic world.
I went down and sat down with Joe and Mike down at the offices they had at the time. And we just talked about it, talked about the realities, what were possible, what things were possible, what things were feasible.
Parker? And action! Got it.
Gremlins was all practical. We had no CGI. We had a limited palette of tools at our disposal. So it was a matter of kind of being able to, as I worked on the design, to say, I think we're going to need to be doing a lot of rodding on these arms. And they do a lot of reaching and a lot of activity. So these guys need longer arms to do this stuff. And shorter legs, because legs are a pain in the butt. They're really hard to do on a puppet. That's why most puppet movies are, waist up. The interesting aspect of doing both designs at the same time for me was that they had to, in many ways, be opposites, cute and cuddly and scaly and nasty, but still had to be two sides of the same character. I couldn't take a Mogwai, cute little Gizmo, and have him turn into a crocodile. It doesn't look like there's a biological advancement there. So I had to come up with some key elements that were translations from Mogwai to Gremlin. The ears were the big ones because for me, they were key to the character of both the Mogwai and the Gremlins for different reasons. I call them mood indicators because it's a really simple way to show a range of stuff going on. Their ears shoot up when they're surprised, they fold back when they're angry. You've got a lot of very simple communication tools in just those ears.
They took us to Chris Wayless's creature shop, and we got a tour, and the tour kind of turned into almost like a little bit of a lesson where they sort of hooked me up to Gizmo, and Chris came over and said, we've been rehearsing for weeks. I want you to feel comfortable treating it like it's a real creature. So if you want to scratch its nose, scratch its nose. You want to rub its ear gently. I said, okay, rub its ear.
Just be careful. You gotta be gentle.
I will. So there was a session where for about 10 or 15 minutes, I would do things like interact with it, touch its nose, touch its ears, smile at it, frown at it, etc. And they would try and kind of mimic and go along with it before we ever shot a frame of footage. So there was definitely a little bit of rehearsal, but most of it was like, hook me up and let's go. I probably had the most difficulty believing in it fully because oftentimes the wires and the cables from the animatronic were taped to my body. So I would have wires going all the way down my body and coming out of a hole they cut in my sock. So I would be holding the Gizmo and I would be dragging anywhere from 10 to 30 different wires along the floor.
It's basically a system that is hooked up to a whole system of cables, which you can see right here underneath, which is huge, twice the size of the puppet at least. And many of the controls, especially on the face, go down to a real simple but ingenious system of hand controls like this. Right now I'm controlling the mouth here. And the head turn, and arms have to have a separate system of controls because they're a little more involved.
The wires would all go to a separate individual person with a joystick. So one person would control the ears, one person would control the nose, one person, they would have to all synchronize those 10 different things by watching monitors at the same time.
And these puppets had anywhere from a single operator to a dozen operators. You had to hide all those people.
There was a virtual army of people under the set living there. Sometimes they didn't come out all day. You know, they just go out to go to the bathroom. It was very demanding. And looking into that monitor, these little black and white monitors with the picture reversed all day, and trying to decide whether if you pull this cable, his eyebrow goes down, and you pull this other cable, his eyebrow goes the other way. Well, that doesn't work. They got to both go down at the same time. And since there was usually more than one person per puppet, it was quite a coordination to be able to get everything to look like it was real.
There were, simple puppets and slightly more advanced puppets, but we did maybe a dozen of one kind, a dozen of another kind. And then there was 100 different, each individually assembled and built and mechanized and operated puppet. So it was really critical for the crew to be really aware of what each puppet could or couldn't do.
So what do we do next? We have the radio control car next.
Okay, Jim, so
This guy done, and then we have to go, I think he's probably done for the day, and then we go to the chainsaw guy.
I couldn't give the same directions to them for 3 different puppets. And so I wound up being a real channel house for Joe. So Joe would say, okay, make them sad and lean over here and try and reach for that and stuff, okay? And so I would do the technical interpretation of that and say, so give it about a 40-degree turn to the right and drop, half inch and then do the reach. And that's the way we operated.
We tried to make him walk, but the technology just didn't exist at the time. So it was decided that he would be carried around in the hero's backpack, which actually was a big help because you could fit a lot of stuff inside that backpack in the way of motors and cables and things like that. And so we were actually able to create the illusion that this non-existent thing was alive. So much so that the dog in the movie was convinced that this creature was alive.
Oh, what is it?
No.
It's your new pet.
And he responded to it as he would another creature. We ended up making different size gizmos because we just couldn't get it to be that expressive in a small package.
You could only fit so many servo motors and wires inside this little tiny head. So for big close-ups, when Gizmo really needed to act, it really needed to do Laurence Olivier level emoting, we had to build a big version of the head. And then of course we had to make oversized props to match the giant, head.
The other thing about Gizmo that most people don't know that's really amazing is that he had what I would describe as a peel-off face. So his face would be sort of hollow, and then they would take a smiley face and they would stick the smiley face on, and they would do spirit gum around and they would glue it, and so you'd have the smiley Gizmo. And then they'd go, okay, well now he's upset because someone turned the light on, so they peel the smiley face off, and then they take a sad kind of pouty face and they put the sad pouty face on the Gizmo, and they would just peel that. And I was like, wow, that's clever. You just peel the expression off and peel it back on.
We didn't have that same approach with the Gremlins. Basically, the Gremlins had that face. We had different versions of it, but it was a gremlin face, and we couldn't really vary a character off that and do it easily. So I had to come up with something that was transferable so that any one of these gremlin puppets could quickly become our bad guy. And I don't know where I came up with the mohawk, but that just seemed like such a easy slap-on job. I was like, this is gonna work. This is gonna make them so special, and it's gonna look fantastic,
Mom, it's Stripe. I always liked the scenes with Stripe because he never had to be attached to me. He was always over there. So I never had any wires or anything like that. But I loved the movement of the Gremlins, even when in person when you were there. It was really amazing to see. But I remember Chris Walas always sort of treating Gizmo like he was his problem child. And that's because Gizmo was the most complicated and therefore would sometimes break down the most frequently. And when Gizmo broke, you could hear it. Like, he would turn and you'd hear like, pa-ping, and like a spring would pop in his ear. And everybody eventually started to know what the sound was. And then Chris Wayless would go, oh boy, hang on a second. And then he would look at Gizmo and he'd sort of look around the ear and he'd be like, I don't know. Oh, geez. And as soon as we heard Chris say that, we're like, uh-oh. And I remember I turned to Hoyt one time and I was like, what do you think, 6 hours? He's like, I think more like 8 hours. And they'd be like, that's about a 7-hour delay. And we're like, we tied.
We shot for 3 months with the actors and the Gremlins only insofar as they have to interact with the actors. Then we shut down for 3 weeks so that Chris Wayless could then really get everything together to do an intensive 2.5-month Gremlins only shoot with no sound or anything, just shooting the Gremlins.
And it was maddening. It was just maddening because after you've been staring at these puppets for all this time, you just can't tell whether they're looking real or they're not looking real. They just start to look like these phantasmagoric things that you dream about at night. And the only exception to that plan was that we brought Phoebe back to do this bar scene because it was just her and the Gremlins, and that was done way after everybody else had left. And we have stop motion in the movie because I love stop motion, and there were certain things that we just weren't going to be able to do any other way. So there is a scene where a mass of Gremlins descend upon the town, and we got the little miniature town and little Gremlin puppets, all of which were numbered and can be moved, one joint at a time. It took forever. And in the middle of shooting, one of the lights blew out. And everyone was distraught because they thought, well, I got to start over. And I said, no, don't start. Just keep going, and we'll just put a sound on the soundtrack of a light breaking as if they've thrown a rock and broken a street lamp, and it'll be fine. And it's in the movie that way.
We hired Mark Mangini, the sound designer, to actually come up with the actual sounds of the Gremlins. And Mark actually wrote a Gremlin vocabulary, like, Gizmo caca and that kind of stuff.
Gizmo caca. Yum. Clap, clap.
And then there was the casting and post-production of the Gremlins' voices.
The voices were done in post-production, and it was largely Frank Welker and for most of the Gremlins and Howie Mandel for Gizmo.
Frank Welker is the Mel Blanc of this day. He was the voice of everything you ever heard in every cartoon. In fact, I know he's the sound of Stripe. And he suggested me to come in and audition. So I'd done voices in my act, but I had no career as a voiceover artist. So I looked at this little fuzzy thing, and it looked like that's the sound that would come out of it, and it was fun.
Fun! Actually, this is my real voice.
I do this so people don't make fun of me.
Neat. Joe said, I need somebody to play Gizmo. I said, I have some friends in the business. Let me look around. And he said, that's kind of it. That's kind of, the range we're looking for. And I said, I'll come in and try, but I really don't see me as Gizmo.
I get there after the movie's already made. The magic was already there. I mean, I was just this little, I think I'm a condiment on this movie. You want your hamburger, but you go, it just needs mustard.
This is the mustard.
Because I had seen the movie in so many stages along the way, and I had heard temporary voices for some of the creatures, when I finally, heard, Gizmo as voiced by Howie Mandel, that was Gizmo. That was going to be Gizmo as long as we could keep making Gremlin movies.
If Joe ever has an inkling to bring Gizmo back, I know one guy that'll be there.
That'll be me. Bye, Billy. Call me Joe. Call me Joe. Or call me Gizmo, Joe.
Gremlins.
The term Gremlins was kind of a forgotten kind of, reference to this World War II thing of them getting into airplanes and screwing up the works of airplanes. But now, when people say Gremlins, they know what it means because of the movie.
We had a bunch of rubber puppets that people had to fall in love with or hate. And I was absolutely terrified that Gizmo was going to come out of this box and the audience was going to go, come on. This is stupid, I'm out of here, And so I remember I purposely saw Gremlins with an audience the first time I saw the finished film. And I was shaking, what's going to happen? And little hands come out and Gizmo's head comes up and the whole audience goes, oh, and I'm like, I felt like I had gone to heaven.
When I went to the theater and sat there with, 500 people, 600 people, and watched this world that Joe had created come together, I forgot it was me making that sound, and I fell in love with the movie, and it's magic.
My favorite scene in Gremlins is we go into the bar, and Phoebe Cates is being forced to, work and serve all of the Gremlins. And I love the Gremlin character with the Frank Sinatra fedora with the cigarette. I mean, that whole sequence in the bar is my favorite scene.
When I look back on Gremlins, I can't believe we actually got through it. Every scene that comes up is sort of like, wow, we got away with that.